It doesn't seem that long ago that we're talking about Sergio Perez as Red Bull's perfect number 2 driver, but it's amazing how quickly things can change in Formula 1. Because of his recent struggles, he's gone from being an outside title contender to now struggling to put a run of results together, which seems to suggest that Red Bull will not offer him a new contract when his current deal expires at the end of 2024. Given that this is likely to be the case, Red Bull is surely already on the lookout for a replacement driver to step into the second Red Bull seat alongside Max Verstappen. But according to recent rumours, this could happen earlier than expected, as there was speculation going around that Checo could announce his retirement at his home race in Mexico, or that Red Bull has told him that if he doesn't finish second in the World Championship behind Max, he will be given the boot. Now, as these are just rumours, and given that Perez does have a contract for 2024, we're going to assume that Red Bull will honour this and that they'll only be looking out for a driver to sign as a replacement for Perez for 2025 rather than next year. So what kind of driver are Red Bull looking for? Well, apart from obviously needing somebody who is fast, they'll need somebody who is dependable, who they can rely on to pick up the pieces when Max isn't able to string a weekend together and can't win the race. They'll also need somebody who can push Max and be close to him, but not to the extent where it maybe causes a bit of inter-team friction or rivalry. They'll also need somebody who can help bolster their points tally in the Constructors' Championship, because let's say it is closer in 2024, there's not a guarantee that Red Bull will be able to hold off the opposition to win a Constructors' Championship again. So those are the type of qualities that I think Red Bull will be looking for when they're trying to consider what type of driver they want to sign to partner Max. But let's have a look at the contenders who I think will be in the frame to replace Perez alongside Max in 2025. The first driver that I'm going to pick is Daniel Ricciardo, who of course Red Bull know extremely well, given that he previously drove for the team between 2014 and 2018 and recently came back into a third driver role at the start of this season when he was given the boot by McLaren at the end of 2022. Now that Daniel is back as part of the Red Bull family, this will give him an extremely good chance of being considered for that Red Bull seat. We know that he is currently driving for AlphaTauri, although he has missed the last few races because of his recovery from injury that he sustained at the Dutch Grand Prix, just 3 races into his F1 comeback. But we know that he did a bit of testing for Red Bull at the start of the season, where he did a test at Silverstone, and Red Bull said that his lap times were pretty competitive and that his best lap time was actually good enough to qualify on the front row for this year's British Grand Prix. And we know that they've been impressed with his work in the simulator as part of that role as well. I think that Red Bull looked at these test times and his work in the simulator as a sign of Ricciardo having his mojo back, because we know just how demoralising his time at McLaren was, because his period there really was a nightmare, where his driving characteristics never suited how the car really needed to be driven. And despite him trying to find many solutions to fixing the problems that he had in the car, he was never able to find one, and this meant that he never got the results that everybody expected him to get when he moved to McLaren in 2021. But as for other plus points, the obvious one is that Red Bull absolutely love Ricciardo, as we all do, because he's got that smiley personality that is great for marketing events, he's great for sponsors, and of course they know him extremely well from his previous time at the team, where he spent 5 seasons and had the majority of his success. But also another plus point is that he had a great relationship with Max Verstappen when they were teammates at Red Bull, and despite the fact that at times it did get a little bit heated, you think of the collision in Baku in 2018, apart from that it never got frosted, and it was a great competitive rivalry. It was great for Red Bull because they had 2 really good drivers who were able to push one another and get the best out of each other and the team. And I think that without a doubt this will definitely be something that Red Bull will be considering when they're looking at Ricciardo as a potential replacement for Perez, because that Verstappen-Ricciardo combination was ultimately extremely successful for Red Bull. It has to go down as one of their strongest driver pairings of all time because of how close they were performance-wise, and you'd have to say that if they'd had the car that they have now back then, they would have surely won at least 1 World Championship. But on the downside, there is of course Ricciardo's stint at McLaren that I've already mentioned that didn't go to plan. And of course it's still too early to judge his form at AlphaTauri, given that he's only done 2 races. But I think there is a good chance of Red Bull taking a chance on Ricciardo because of their past relations. And ultimately I do think it would be a good move if they do decide to go in this direction. My next contender is Yuki Tsunoda, who rightly has earned a lot of praise this year for his performances, given how much he has improved from his previous 2 years in Formula 1. Now, of course, this is Yuki's 3rd season in F1 since he made his debut in 2021, and there was a lot of hype around him when he came into the sport because of how quickly he'd progressed through the junior ranks. but he hasn't really lived up to that height so far. He's clearly shown that he has the speed, but he's made far too many mistakes and hasn't shown a lot of consistency. But all of that has changed in 2023 because Yuki's been able to team that speed with both maturity and consistency, as he's demonstrated with his performances this year. And out of the 4 drivers that AlphaTauri has run this season, Yuki remains the only one to have finished in the points more than once. In fact, he's managed to do it on 3 occasions. But arguably, what was the most impressive part of Yuki's season so far was when he was teammates with Nick de Vries at the start of the year. And Nick only obviously had 1 Grand Prix experience under his belt, so Yuki was the far more experienced driver in Formula 1 terms. And obviously this meant that he was effectively the de facto team leader, and this was a role that he really thrived in, I felt. He was never really faced with the added responsibilities that come with being a team leader, given that the fact that AlphaTauri would likely go to him as the more experienced driver to rely on feedback over how the car was performing over a Grand Prix weekend, for example. But something that has been noticeable this year is the fact that Yuki doesn't seem to get the praise and adulation that other drivers in the Red Bull fold get. It even seems that Ricciardo and Liam Lawson, who replaced Ricciardo during his recovery from injury, has gotten a lot more praise for their performances than Yuki has, despite the fact that Yuki has driven the whole season. So it kind of comes across to me that Yuki still has a lot to prove to Red Bull to show that he is a driver worthy of earning a seat at the team in 2025. But given that he is still young and still isn't really a polished driver, I think that Red Bull will look at that and maybe think that it is maybe too early to give Yuki that kind of opportunity this early in his career. They'll also take into consideration how badly certain promotions of other younger Red Bull drivers have gone when they've been promoted to the senior Red Bull team. Look at how Pierre Gasly's time went alongside Max in 2019. Look at how Alex Albon's stint at Red Bull went. They know that they need a driver who is able to deliver in that second seat, and that Yuki may not be that driver they're after. But an even bigger factor in why Yuki may not be chosen by Red Bull is the fact that he has been linked with a move away from the Red Bull fold, specifically to Aston Martin, because of course Aston Martin will be going into partnership with Honda at the start of 2026 when the new regulations come in, and we know just how keen Honda will be to have a Japanese driver in the team, and Yuki is the obvious candidate for that seat. So obviously there is a chance that he could jump ship out of the Red Bull fold if he so chooses and thinks that that is a better option for him in his career. So I think that with the rumours linking Yuki with that move to Aston Martin, given that his relations with Red Bull are not as strong as I think that they could be, I think this is enough to suggest that he will not be the driver at Red Bull make a beeline to replace Perez in 2025. My third and final pick is going to be Lando Norris. Now this comes off the back of a year in which he has been consistently linked with a move to Red Bull, despite the fact that he actually has a contract with McLaren to the end of 2025. But obviously this is no surprise given how Lando has performed both this year and in his previous seasons at McLaren, and he really has developed into one of the top drivers now on the grid. Now, of course, out of the 3 drivers that are picked, Lando is obviously the only one that isn't part of the Red Bull family. But of course, as we know from the past, that does not mean that he can't make the move to Red Bull, with the 2 previous examples being Mark Webber in 2007 and Perez in 2021. And it's been no surprise to anyone to see that Red Bull has been chasing Norris's signature, because they have been long admirers of him even before he turned the wheel in Formula 1. But the obvious barricade to a deal being completed is the fact that Norris is tied to McLaren until the end of 2025, which means that if Red Bull wanted this deal to happen, they would need to buy him out of that contract to get him into that seat for the start of that season. From a driving point of view, I think that Lando would bring a huge amount to Red Bull if he was to join them. He's clearly shown he's made a year-on-year improvement during his time in F1, and has already shown he's got the credentials of being a future world champion. He's clearly got the speed and the talent. He can perform no matter what the conditions are, and as a bonus, he's shown that he can be a team player as well. You also have to consider that Lando has a great relationship with Max, both on and off the track, and I think that would be a benefit to Red Bull because it would bring a harmonious atmosphere inside the team. But the only downside is that Max knows just how good Lando is, and if Lando starts to beat him every now and again, that could shake the dynamic inside the team. And this would be a concern for Red Bull because it would take them back into a situation that they'd rather not go back into, given that it would revive memories of the Sebastian Vettel Mark Webber rivalry that they had to deal with in the past. But of course, there's every chance that this deal may never come to fruition because, as we've already mentioned, Lando is contracted to McLaren until the end of 2025. So this would require Red Bull to try and buy him out of his contract if they want to sign him. And of course, McLaren will likely play hardball. They will not let him go that easily. And then, of course, there is the potential scenario that Lando does not want to leave McLaren and actually thinks that he'd be better off staying there. But overall, I think that if this move was to ever happen, it would be extremely exciting for everybody in F1, because you'd have the situation of the current best driver on the grid, the reigning champion, going up against the young prince, the young pretender, trying to take the crown away from him. So I think that out of Ricciardo, Tsunoda and Norris, I think the driver that Red Bull will most likely pick to replace Perez will be Ricciardo. I think this will be because, as I've already mentioned, Ricciardo is well liked and well loved inside the Red Bull family. They know him extremely well from his previous stint there, and they know just how good a driver he is. And on top of that, I think Ricciardo does fit the bill in terms of the driver that Red Bull is looking for to fill that second seat alongside Max. And he does tick a lot of boxes in terms of the credentials that they're looking for. And I think that they are open to giving him that opportunity to show just how good he is again in a race-winning car. As for why Yuki and Lando won't get it, I think that Yuki still doesn't quite fit that Red Bull driver mould, and I think those links with Aston Martin, I think they will come true, and I think he will make the move there in 2026 when they team up with Honda. And then with Lando, I think with McLaren improving so much this season after that mid-season upgrade and looking how competitive they are, if they carry that over into next year, into 2024, I don't see any reason why he'd want to leave the team. I think that he actually would end up staying. So there you have it. That's the driver that I think that Red Bull will choose to replace Sergio Perez with in 2025. But now I want to hear what your opinion is. Do you agree with my pick, or do you think there is another driver that Red Bull will choose to team up with Max Verstappen in the future? Be sure to let me know in the comments section. And also don't forget to leave a like on the video and to subscribe to the channel. Thanks for watching, guys, and I will see you in the next one. Goodbye.